right, folks, we're back from a little weekend break with some new Hearthstone cards to talk about. It's Shaman today, and they got a sick new legendary here with Muradin High King. This is a new 5-mana 3/2. It is the fabled card for Shaman, so when you add Muradin to your deck, you're also going to get High King's Hammer and Avatar Form added to your deck for free. He also has Rush and Battle Cry. Bring the High King's Hammer to me. So he's basically Thor calling his hammer, and then Death Rattle, add it to your hand. So what that means is no matter where the High King's Hammer is, whether that's in your deck, hand, or even equipped, Muradin is going to like absorb it as a buff on himself, gaining its stats. So 3/4 at a base. I guess maybe if you've already equipped it, you might only get like 3/2 if you've attacked, or 3/1 or whatever. But he's also going to gain Wind Fury. So what that means is if you just play Muradin on turn 5, he's immediately going to jump to a 6/6 with Rush and Wind Fury, and he's going to draw you the card effectively because his Death Rattle is going to then add the High King's Hammer to your hand, assuming he doesn't get silenced or whatever. So honestly, like, pretty solid turn 5 play, I think, ultimately, because you get a little reactivity with the Wind Fury and Rush. You can like clean up your opponent's board a little bit, and then you're also getting this upside on the High King's Hammer, which is an infinite value engine. It is a 3/4 Wind Fury weapon with Death Rattle. Shuffle this into your deck with +2 attack permanently. So not only does that initial Wind Fury offer you a surprising amount of lethality on this weapon, like it's already, 12 damage at a base, but then the next iteration jumps up to 20 damage, right? It's like, whoa, dude, that is like a 5/4 Wind Fury weapon is nuts. We've also got a way to buff this weapon from the other fabled card, Avatar Form, or buff your attack anyway, I should say. And we're going to see another way to buff attack in this video for Shaman as well. I'll also note Shaman has access to Demon Hunter cards through Perils in Paradise, at least until the rotation early next year, that also have ways to buff attack. So there are actually a handful of ways to juice this Wind Fury weapon up even more. You could probably easily get this thing to 10 attack or something. But Avatar Form reads, give a friendly character +2 attack, and after this attacks, deal 2 damage to all enemies this turn. All enemies is both face and minions. So that is +2 on the weapon, but with Wind Fury, of course, that's really pushing that weapon up to a 5/4. That means you hit for 10, but then you also get 2 instances of that after this attacks for another 4. That's a 14 damage push, like all at once, if you have the hammer equipped and you play Avatar Form, which is pretty nuts. I'll also note, like, I think sometimes playing Avatar Form on turn 3 might feel just fine if you like really need a consecration. You hit 2 to face, you could even hit like a 3/4 or whatever and deal 2 to the rest of the board. Probably okay in a pinch. Maybe something you want to save later for High King's Hammer pop-offs and just doing a ton of damage. But here's what I'll say. I think each independent piece of this feels pretty good. I think Muradin's actually totally reasonable to play as a 6/6 with Rush and Wind Fury. Solid threat, decent reactivity. High King's Hammer is basically like a super Doom Hammer, and like, yes, it's expensive, but it does offer so much lethality that I think you're going to find moments to squeeze that in, even if you have to attack some minions initially. Saving those second 2 hits for face could go a really long way, and the infinite nature of this shuffling into your deck, making it bigger and bigger, could be notable upside as well. That second one might be enough to just kill people, right? So at the end of the day, what I'm getting at is I think this is a strong card. I think it's got some immediacy that's good, long-term upside that's good, lethality that's good. All of that is a great combination, and I think it's the sort of thing too you could toss into a lot of decks. A control deck actually could utilize this well because of the infinite nature of the High King's Hammer, just using this to whittle down opponents. An aggressive deck could use this well. Again, just using the turn 6 kind of finisher almost with the High King's Hammer, right? There's a few ways to make this really interesting. So this just looks like a very, very good card for Shaman to utilize across the board. So speaking of really good cards for Shaman to utilize across the board, this isn't one. This is Farseer Woe, the other Shaman legendary. It's more like, whoa, this card sucks. I'm sorry, I'm being mean now. I do think this card's kind of weak though. Farseer Woe is a 4-mana 2/6 with elusive, and after you cast a spell, discover a nature spell from the past. So, we've had a few of these cards before that, care about you casting a spell and something cool happens after you've cast a spell. Often they're in this like 4 to 5 mana range that's sometimes really hard to work around because it's just a lot of overhead. You need a full turn basically to turn this into something interesting. The problem is, not only is it a lot of overhead with this one, but the payoff is not good. Even discovering nature spells, it's still just not going to be that good on average, particularly ones from the past. Older cards are generally lower power level. It is specifically Shaman nature spells, of course, because it is discover. So it does narrow the pool enough that it feels better. But it's just like, again, you're going to get such a random mix of stuff that it's so hard to make it like line up how you want, right? It's not going to be directionally aligned with your deck or your game plan or your moment. You're just going to be trying to find all this stuff in a pinch and trying to turn something good out of it. And even Shaman has a crazy big nature pool. It's like, and frankly, high cost things kind of suck because you can't keep your chain going easily, right? Like you might have things in hand that started the chain. You could just use those and like stockpile value, but often you might want to create a chain in a pinch, just taking cheap things and cycling into more and more and more so that you have kind of an active side of it and a value side of it. But it's just like, there are definitely some good cards, but there's just weird stuff, like Vivid Spores is like, okay, what am I doing with this? Bioluminescence, what am I doing with this? You're going to get some offers there where it's like all three of them just don't really fit the moment. And sometimes you're not going to have a way to play them because Farseer Woe has elusive. So it's like, if the opponent's board is clear and you play Farseer Woe and you get a Jade Lightning, it's like, well, I guess Jade Lightning can go face. But there's going to be instances like Hex. I can't Hex anything. It's dead. I've broken my chain already. Again, you might have stuff in hand to keep the chain going and maybe you save the Hex for later. It's not like a disaster necessarily. But it's kind of weird that it has elusive because that might create limitations where you don't have anything to cast on this spell and you could break your chain or with stuff in hand. We're going to see some cards in this video that want to target your own minions very often. It seems like this elusive is not a buff necessarily to Farseer Woe. It might actually just be a nerf preventing you from utilizing this with some like zero cost stuff we're going to see in this video. I think I can literally just show you that. Static Shock. Deal 1 damage to a minion, right? Like if your opponent's out of minions, you can't use Static Shock on Farseer Woe. There could be moments, there's going to be other things that literally target your own minions. So I don't know, it's just like it's clunky, the reward's not there, it's kind of expensive for what it does. Elusive is actually kind of bad. You're not going to be able to like tempo this out on turn 4 and then pop off on turn 5. You probably want to save this for turn 10 or something even to get reasonable value out of it, and then the value you get, just not a great reward. So ultimately I just don't see any way to make this card work. I think this is going to feel really awkward, really low payoff, super slow, and there's so many ways to make value that you just don't need a card like this generating this sort of value. Now, before we get into a bunch of different Shaman spells, I think it's important to have some context here because Shaman's getting this little kind of 2-card set of minions here that want to be damaged by your own spells. So first of those is the Flux Revenant, a 2-mana 1/4 elemental with taunt, and whenever you would damage this with a nature spell, it gains +2/+1 instead. And I already teased that one spell that could be something you use on your own minions or enemy minions. And there's a few others as well. On top of that, we also have the Storm Rook here. This is a 5/5/5 elemental beast. Whenever you would damage this with a nature spell, summon a random 5-cost minion instead. So a couple ways here where if you're damaging your own stuff, you're going to realize some upsides. And a handful of spells that we're going to run through real quickly now, just so you can kind of see this entire set of stuff as a whole before we get into each individual piece. So first up is that Static Shock 0-mana spell. This one, could be used on enemy stuff quite easily, but you might actually just want to use this on your own stuff as a 0-mana way to like buff that 2-drop early. Give yourself a little bit of attack, or again, maybe save that for Wind Fury. We've also got Thunderquake here. This deals 1 damage to all minions. So this is not only a Wind Fury effect that could clean up AoE stuff, but also damage your own stuff that you want damaged, and also gets you a Static Shock, which of course could again be another way to scale up all of those dudes. Again, these 0-mana spells, theoretically play nicely into Farseer Woe, but at the same time, I just don't think the reward's going to be worth it. I'd rather spend my 4 mana doing something else. Like, yes, it technically works together. I'm not ignoring the fact that these are clearly synced up until you run out of minions, I guess. But, if you have your own stuff, the opponent has stuff. As long as you don't have to target WoW itself, like, yes, of course it works together. I just don't think you want that. I'd rather spend 4 mana doing other things that work with this. It just doesn't seem worth the payoff. So anyway, another way to damage your stuff and create a chain of damaging your stuff. You've also got the Nascent Bolt here. 3 mana, deal 5 damage to a minion. If it survives, draw 2 cards. So again, could be used on an enemy minion to clear in a pinch, or you could use it on your own stuff. Instead of taking damage, you will then draw 2 cards and activate that upside, maybe a buff or maybe summoning a 5-drop for you. And then finally here, the Lightning Rod, a 1 mana nature spell, deal 2 damage to a friendly minion specifically. So this one you do need the friendly minion to target, and then also deal 4 damage to a random enemy minion, but you gotta target your own guy first. So this one's definitely the most narrow of all of these, but also very cheap at 1, and also 4 damage could help you take an early swing. You could see some big plays with like Flux Revenant into a Lightning Rod, creating a monster swing. You get a nice buff and a little board clear on board. So minion clear. So that's the entire like self-damaging package here. Some of that could also be enemy minions, but all of this needs to be kind of considered together as a whole as I talk about each individual piece here. So, all right, Static Shock, 0 mana nature spell. They do need to be nature spells to work with the Flux Revenant and the Storm Rook or whatever it's called. Do keep in mind, Farseer Woe doesn't have to be natures on the casting side of it. This could be anything, but you discover nature spells in case there's any confusion there. But anyway, Static Shock, 0 mana spell. Of course, anytime something's 0 mana, you're kind of intrigued because there's always little hooks you can do with that, like Rogue, obviously setting up combos and stuff. But other classes do still have ways to do that, proccing things like after you cast a spell. Again, not that I'm excited about WoW, but future cards could exist in that space. Could even be past cards where this just triggers something in some way because it's a 0 mana card. I also think the +1 attack is actually really meaningful. Like, you just go into turn 6 with one of these and your hammer from Muradin, and you're talking about, this is really worth 2 damage for 0 mana on a Wind Fury weapon. You build up a few of these in hand, you might actually just be setting up to kill the opponent on turn 6. And the fact that these only cost 0 is a great way to just get that going ASAP. As soon as that weapon's there, you might have that follow-up immediately to give yourself an extra like 3 damage or whatever, which is really an extra 6 damage, which is really lethal on the opponent. And the fact that this can be used to clean up a little minion here and there in the process, a little ping, maybe even a little 2-part ping where you hit one and hit the other with your face if you need to early in a pinch or whatever. All those possibilities exist. So in other words, this does a lot for a 0 mana spell, and sometimes I'd feel a little at risk of like running a 0 mana spell in my deck. Like, do I just need each draw to be more significant? Do I need each slot in my deck to be more impactful? But I actually think this is pretty impactful for 0 mana and has a few different angles where it could be useful at different stages of the game as well, even though it's 0 mana. So I actually think this works really nicely. It might be fine in a fuel for a self-damage deck like we saw with those 2 minions. Might just be fine with Muradin. And sometimes just the 0 mana spell could create some interesting synergies as well. So ultimately, I think this looks pretty darn good. So the next up here, we have the Thunderquake, which I freaking love this artwork too. Dude, this Muradin Thor dude looks crazy. 2 mana nature spell, deal 1 damage to all minions and get a Static Shock. So there's that Static Shock again, and this is just like a nice little whirlwind as well. Of course, back in the days, Whirlwind cost 1 and this is 2, and it's like, oh, okay, I'm not super pumped about it costing a little extra than an old school card like that. But the Static Shock upside is actually really rather nice. Like, banking those up in hand could be really cool. And of course, this 1 damage maybe not only cleans up a little token board from your opponent, but also plays into your minions that you want to get damaged in this case as well. So there are potentially a few upsides here, not to mention, scaling with spell damage and stuff too could be a good way to juice this up a little further. Shaman does still have the spell damage totem currently in core, don't forget, and some other ways as well to get cheap spell damage. So I don't know if that'd be the angle you'd go for this, but I wouldn't be totally shocked to see this like splashed into a control deck that's also running Muradin anyway, and then you kind of save up the Static Shocks for Muradin or something. Like, not really like an all-in finisher for a control deck. You might just prefer the long-term nature of the hammer, just beating them down over time. But, this is a nice little control tool. So, I ultimately just think this card does a lot, I guess. Because it gives you that Static Shock value back, I think it does a lot for 2. You're probably not too mad to run this. And I think 1 damage, it's not perfect these days, but there are still a lot of little 1/1s floating around, and little scenarios where this plays nicely. So could this be restricted specifically to a deck that's trying to go for the self-damage stuff? No, I think it could break beyond that just because Static Shock has relevance, but I think it definitely makes a lot of sense in that kind of deck as well, which I as we're going to talk about with those minions, I do think that deck could actually get there, at least on the 2-drop. Maybe I'm not in love with the 5-drop necessarily. Moving on here to the Nascent Bolt, another nature spell, 3 mana, deal 5 damage to a minion, and if it survives, draw 2 cards. So I kind of see this 2 ways, right? Sometimes this will be in a pinch removal where it's like, okay, I just, desperately need to kill this 5 health thing. I'm not that worried about the card draw right now. I just, need to slam this and kill this thing and get out of the way. And I'm going to use my Nascent Bolt for that. And, it's like a Shadow Bolt or whatever of the old school days. Other times, of course, this is fine to just rip onto your 2-drop. And, you don't care that you're necessarily losing the 5 damage aspect because you're buffing your 2-drop guy that we looked at earlier. And you're now drawing 2 cards as well, which ultimately for 3 mana, that's not bad. An active onboard buff and drawing 2, that's great. Also, Shaman has been a little light on card draw recently, as I recall. I remember building Shaman decks. Sometimes I feel like I don't have quite enough card draw. So particularly as an engine for that kind of deck, this does make sense to me. I will say, I think that's pretty narrow. I don't think this one ever escapes beyond that package. Like, yes, you can still use the 5 damage on an enemy minion and like soften it up or whatever and still draw. So, deal 5 to a 6 health minion and then finish it off with the Thunderquake or whatever. Those lines exist, but it's like, you don't usually want to have to go 2 for 1 when clearing a minion, even with the card draw bonus. So in other words, like, would a control deck run this? I don't think so. I feel like it'd be a hard excuse to like only deal 5, and then like figure out the removal later. Maybe with enough AoEs, if you had some lightning storms and some, what is this called, Thunderquakes in the mix, like maybe you could piece it together and find an excuse using this as your card draw. But I still think it'd be awkward, and there'd be moments where it's like you really wanted to draw cards, you don't have anything to target, the opponent has all 3/3s or whatever, you're like, God, I can't use this as card draw. So I think you kind of have to build into this basically. So this does narrow the field of play for this card a lot compared to the other ones. Like, I think Thunderquake can escape that build. I do not think Nascent Bolt can escape this build. So its fate is certainly tied to the success of this little package here. And then we've got Lightning Rod. The story might be the same for Lightning Rod here. 1 mana nature spell, deal 2 damage to a friendly minion, to deal 4 damage to a random enemy minion, which I will say, like, outside of this package, I don't think this ever gets played really. It's like you don't want to have this conditionality built into your tiny little removal card, and it's not even a good removal card, right? It's 4 damage to random minion, so not even that much damage, not like crazy hard removal, so the randomness is a downside and the dealing damage to your stuff is a downside, unless you very specifically run, exactly Flux Revenant and Stormbrook. And then it certainly makes more sense. I still don't think it's like crazy good though, just because that 4 damage to random minion is so tough, right? It's so tough. I kind of wish they'd let you multi-target this one. We do have kind of multi-targeting now in Hearthstone where you could target your own thing and then target the enemies. That would certainly help this a lot. Or maybe if it could hit just random enemy and it could maybe go face, that could also be some nice upside where even if the opponent doesn't have a board, you still get to utilize this in a compelling kind of way. So I don't know, like, the card draw on this feels a lot more exciting to me in a lot of ways. It is 3 times as expensive though. So does the 1 cost on Lightning Rod make it worth it as a way to just kind of weave into this deck and, a good follow up on a turn 2 Flux Revenant or something, or, I don't know, you coin this out on turn 1, you play 2 Lightning Rods on turn 2, you clear the opponent's board and your Flux Revenant's crazy buffed. Those turns could happen. It's just, well, let's go ahead and talk about Flux Revenant, and I'll say why I'm not so convinced those turns are going to happen very often. So this is Flux Revenant, the 2 mana 1/4 elemental with taunt, and whenever you would damage this with a nature spell, it gains +2/+1 instead. So I want to be clear, like, this is a really nice base, right? The 4 health means this has some stickiness inherent to it, and the attack starts scaling nicely too. So, you go to 3/5, and then you go to 5/6, and then you go to 7/7, right? And like, it doesn't take a lot to make this kind of crazy big, and it's nice you can get it down early. And the taunt too, I mean, it does make it hard to hide in some cases, but it also, forces the opponent's hand a little bit sometimes with action. And if you're using stuff like Lightning Rod, they might always be playing from behind a little bit. So like I said, if you get this down early and you start following it up immediately with all these cards, you start ripping Static Shocks and Thunderquakes, this does have those kind of like old school Tunnel Trog vibes where this could just like snowball out of control. And before the opponent knows it, you're looking at like what did I say, like a 9-8 or a 10-9 or, you know, whatever it is, right? 10-8. I don't even know what numbers we get to, but you know, it starts to get pretty big pretty fast if you have all of this stuff, particularly if you're using those cheap static shocks to just really fuel this. I think those moments exist. The problem is this package is only, you know, like maybe 5 cards, which times 2 is 10, right? That's a third of your deck. It's going to be really hard to make this come together as a whole game plan. Like, this is going to be a subset of a deck. So what does the rest of the deck look like? Like, you can see some elemental synergies here, right? Like, you got elemental stuff. So maybe there's some kind of like elemental self-damage shaman that comes together. But I'll say like elementals want chains often, which is kind of awkward. Maybe not as much in shaman, but historically at least. And then it's like, you know, you want to have enough minions down for these, but then you're also running a lot of spells for the minions. And you've just got this kind of clash a little bit in the deck construction, I think, where it's to me feels like it's going to be really hard to support this. It's going to be super feast or famine, where like 1 out of 3 games you hit the nuts and this goes crazy, and maybe that's awesome and you snowball to victory. There's gonna be other games where you just like draw all these disparate pieces at the wrong times, and you know, you're like sitting on lightning rods and you got like a 2 health elemental and you're like, what the heck am I gonna do with this? You know, like, I'm not excited about this. Or you have a nascent bolt and like no good targets for it or whatever, and the deck might just fall apart because you don't have enough minions. This feels like the kind of thing that needs a few more pieces of support in order to be worth it. Maybe the mini set could come along and give it that, but like, there's not a lot of precedent for Blizzard following up super well when it comes to these kinds of tiny packages. They often kind of get left at the wayside, and we don't see enough support to really bring it around. So like, I see some inherent strength in this card as a scaling 2-drop like that, but at the same time, I just don't know if there's enough there to get it all together. So then when it comes to the Stormrook, my other big problem with this package is I think this card's way too slow for this package, and just like a really bad reward for this package. Like, random 5 drops are, you know, it's fine. It's probably like a 4-4 on average or something. Maybe it's a 5-5 on average, which is fine. You'll occasionally get some effects that matter. You'll often get like low statted battle cry things that have terrible stats, and you're really sad about those rolls. So it probably really is like a 4-4 or whatever. The bigger problem though is just like all the cost commitments this takes, right? You know, yes, you could go Stormrook on 5 into like 3 static shocks or something. That would be maybe the like perfect scenario, and you get like 3 instant 5 drops out of it. Those moments are promising, but there will be so many other moments where, you know, you need to play like a nascent bolt or even a thunderquake or even a lightning rod, and suddenly you're talking like, I need to get up to 6, 7, 8 mana in order to start really utilizing this thing. And it's like, if it's only good with static shock, it might not be enough for it to come together. Plus, you know, you already wanted to be doing your Flux Revenant stuff. What do you have left by the time you get to the Stormrook? Again, it's just a question of like quantity here. Is there enough to fuel all of this stuff together? And I started having doubts that this is going to be swingy enough on time. It's like, there's going to be games this just has to land on 7 or 8, and I think that's too late for this kind of card to be the swing it needs, you know? So again, you know, perfect scenario static shocks, like, sure, I can kind of see it happening, but I think this is a weak second part minion follow-up for this sort of package. So next on here, let's move to another minion that's kind of adjacent synergy-wise, but not exactly. It might just be good on its own, too. This is the Primordial Overseer, a 2-mana 2/3 with Battlecry. If you've cast a nature spell while holding this, gain +1/+1 and draw a card. Now, we just saw a ton of nature spells, and some of them were very cheap as well, which means it might not be impossible to actually just play this on turn 2 already buffed, and then you get a 2-mana 3/4 that draws you a card. To be clear, that is fantastic. Like, obviously a 3/4 on 2, above rate on stats, drawing a card is awesome for 2 mana while still developing a lot of tempo and pressure. Like, that's fantastic. So again, you know, static shock seems like the perfect way to sort of enable that. Super cheap nature spell that just gets this thing going absolutely ASAP, right? If you have a target for that static shock, in particular to hit a minion, you know, this can't go face. But if you don't have a minion on turn 1, like, oh man, the game plan could start to fall apart. So this could maybe go in that like self-damage deck as just another minion that synergizes with nature spells. You just need a density of stuff, right? Maybe that's one more piece that's, you know, not exactly a perfect synergy, but certainly still connected. That said, I think this goes beyond that as well. I think totally fine sometimes to play this card on turn 4, turn 5 or whatever. Is just a nice little body that keeps things moving in your deck that's already running nature spells. Basically any deck ever that's running nature spells, to a notable degree. It doesn't even have to be like a full-on nature spell deck. But you just have like maybe, you know, 6 to 8 in your deck or something. I could already see Primordial Overseer just being worth it because it's just really efficient, like good stats and cheap little card draw that cycles through. Seems like a lot of decks could actually value that a lot. So good card, not enough to boost the like self damage necessarily into play for me, but just a generally good card. And then our final Shaman card here is Instant Multiverse, a 6 mana rewind spell. I don't know what it is with these rewind cards, man, but I kind of hate it again. It's summon 12 mana worth of random minions with Overload 3, which is a crazy punishing overload, dude. You are killing your next turn. Maybe there's some overload clearance stuff that could come in and save that giant overload, or some overload synergies that could, you know, utilize that overload. We've had stuff that like scales off overload and such. But as it stands, like summoning 12 mana worth of random stuff, like, yes, it's only 6 mana. You're getting 2x value. What the heck, dude? That's crazy, right? No, it's not crazy, because that's well, it's gonna be a mix, right? Sometimes that'll be like 4 3-drops, perfect split, right? Are you excited to get 4 3-drops for 6 mana? On average, not really. No. Again, you know, some of them will be fine, like 3/4s or whatever. Some will be small because they have a battle cry that got wasted or whatever. It's just random junk, you know. It's really hard to say that that's going to be a reliable result. And then sometimes you'll get really weird boards too, where you get like an 8 mana battle cry thing that sucked, like a Hyreek of old. You know, you get Hyreek, and that's like a majority of your pool. And then you get some little garbage next to Hyreek, and then you take the rewind, right? Because you're like, oh god, that totally sucked. I got to rewind. And then you just get some other mix of stuff that's just like not that great. You know, maybe occasionally you high roll into something really nice and big, but there's just such a wide pool for these rewinds that it's just like the chaos is always going to ensue, and you're always going to have weird, wacky results. And it's just like, you need reliable things. You need game plans that work, and you definitely don't need overload 3s that punish you, because this is not like a swingy enough play that you run away with the victory, right? You can't go into turn 7 with only 4 mana after a weak development like this. So I don't think Rewind saves this. I think it's just too awkward. Probably an interesting arena card, I guess. Like just dumping piles of stuff does work, I think, fairly well in arena. Just like from an output standpoint, you could just get ahead. And like initiative matters a lot more in arena too. When you're ahead, you can usually leverage being ahead a lot. Whereas in standard, the game's just a little too swingy for something like this to, I think, make the impact that it needs. So ultimately, this is yet another Rewind card that seems too expensive and too random. Like, I understand wanting to embrace randomness with Rewind, because that's kind of the element that makes it fun, but I think they still need to rein it in just a little bit. Otherwise, these results are just so varied that the Rewind kind of becomes meaningless, you know? If there's like 3 results and you rewind between 3 results, you know, you can kind of like make sense of it a little bit and like try to nudge it in a very specific direction. This is just, you know, it's just so much variance that the average result is just average. So, yeah, I ultimately just think this card looks really weak and really hard to use. So all that said, let's go ahead and rate these cards from 1 to 5 stars. Muradin High King is a 5-star card. Farseer Woe is a 2-star card. Static Shock is a 4-star card. Thunderquake is a 4-star card. Nascent Bolt is a 3-star card. Lightning Rod is a 2-star card. Flux Revenant is a 3-star card. Stormrook is a 2-star card. Primordial Overseer is a 4-star card. Instant Multiverse is a 1-star card. And yeah, there you go. That's the Shaman set. Basically, you know, I think this like damage your own minion stuff is not going to get there as a package, but I think some of the cards do just escape that via general utility. You know, some of these 4 stars basically I think can be played outside of that world, and that gives them that nice edge. Woe seems really bad, woeful to me, but Muradin, another 5-star Fabled card. I think they're just really pushing these, man. They feel like the kinds of cards that will be in like almost every deck in a lot of cases, and this one seems to have that right mix of lethality and instantaneousness that's useful. So I like this one a lot. Also just giving me fun Here's the Storm memories, man, with Avatar form in particular. Just going into stone form and just jumping into the enemy team was always a lot of fun. So miss Muradin, man. Have we ever had Muradin? I don't think he showed up in Hearthstone, right? I remember him for a long time being on the list of like most iconic Warcraft characters that weren't in the game, right? Yeah, we've never had Muradin, which is crazy to think about, dude. Showed up in Heroes of the Storm before 11 years of Hearthstone. That's wild. Anyway, fun video. I like a lot of these cards a lot. So Curious to hear your thoughts on these down below. Thanks much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.